Hi, I'm Phil Needham with Needham Ag Technologies, and last night we got a rain here in Kentucky, and it's the first measurable rainfall we've had in 5 to 6 weeks. So prior to now, we've been seeding winter wheat into some pretty dry soil conditions, which isn't very unusual for this year because we've had lots of calls from growers from especially Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, as well as some of the more local states to Kentucky, asking about how in the world they can get their drills in the ground into hard, no-till, heavy residue conditions. And that's what we're faced with this year. It's not totally unusual, but all of them factors have combined this year to present some big challenges. So this video is really designed to try and help you maintain target seeding depth, meaning trying to get all the seeds to the same depth under the soil surface even within them challenging conditions. So we're going to go through each of the factors individually. So obviously at the heart of a disc drill is a good disc blade. On a John Deere drill or air seeder or a Case 500 air seeder, the discs are new at 18 inches in diameter. We have found that when the diameter descends down to around 17 inches in diameter, the bevel begins to disappear rapidly and you lose that sharp cutting edge that's really important to be able to shear through hard soils and or heavy residue. So you need a sharp disc that's at least 17 inches in diameter. The only exception to that is we have some growers in South Dakota that farm on a farm that also has a granite quarry. So they're constantly seeding backwards and forwards across fields that have lots of rocks on the soil surface that do accelerate the dulling of disc blades. So that would be the only exception where you may have to replace the disc slightly sooner before 17 inches. So a sharp disc is obviously essential. We sell and recommend the Forged to Know French discs. They're well proven to last around 20 to 21% longer than the Ballasting or Ingersoll discs on the market. They're harder, they last longer, and they retain their sharp edge longer. So that's really important. I want to make mention of the fact of seeding depth, and I've drawn a line on the bottom of this disc to simulate a 1-inch seeding depth with a paint pen, as you can see. Now if you're seeding shallow crops like alfalfa, clover, rape, oilseed rape, radish, any of those crops, you probably don't need to be seeding at an inch. But if you're seeding wheat, barley, soybeans or other larger crops into heavier residue or looser soils with fluffy residue on top, within some of them conditions, you probably need to seed slightly deeper to increase that angle at which the disc cuts or shears residue at the soil surface. So as you increase your seeding depth slightly, it increases your cutting angle at which the disc cuts residue at the soil surface. So what I'm saying is if you increase the seeding depth slightly, it does improve your cutting depth. Lastly, you've got to have adequate weight on the drill, and let's talk about that next. So at the heart of every John Deere factory single disc opener is this large coil spring that you can see in the top of the image. And the more you rotate the 4x4 rock shaft, the more you compress this spring and the more this threaded rod extends through the housing. Now using a spring balance like we're showing here, you can measure the amount of down pressure available on each opener and also measure the amount of rod extension as we see here on the bottom of this graph. So for example, a 40-foot wide John Deere 1890 with no ballast and 7.5-inch spacing, you can extend that rod through the housing a little over an inch and you've got around 350 pounds of weight per opener. Now if you want to plant into harder soils, heavier residue or both, then you're going to have to add ballast, add more down pressure by rotating the rock shaft further and compressing the springs more. So this graph basically shows you how much weight is required to accomplish that. Here's a 50 series opener, and this is important. Look at the gauge wheel. So the gauge wheel is turning and then at one point it stops turning, and that's just not got adequate down pressure to follow the ground and to achieve target seeding depth. All right, look at this opener. This is an 1890 planting into heavy corn residue. The openers are positioned in what we call the alternate pattern. So there's a right and a left opener either side of a corn row, just like you see here. What's important is the left-hand opener here in the image has what we call a spring spacer that's a 1/2 inch thick. It's inserted into the top of the coil spring that you can see here. And I want you to look at the amount of vibration or movement on the opener on the right hand side that doesn't have the spring spacer, and look how much more stable the opener on the left hand side is. And again, these two openers are facing out either side of a corn row, so they're working in similar conditions. So we recommend a digital angle finder, and that helps you understand the angle of the rock shaft. So basically we zero out the angle finder on the frame and we place it on the 4x4 rock shaft once it's zeroed out, and as you rotate the rock shaft backwards, like what we're showing here, it shows you the angle. We recommend in most harder soils with a lot of residue, rotating that rock shaft backwards somewhere between 3 and 5 degrees. That's going to compress the spring about 1.25 inches and will require about 400 to 450 pounds of weight per opener, and obviously will require more ballast on the drill or air seeder frame. So let's talk about ballast on the frame of a drill. And we're always surprised, or we're sometimes surprised, to talk to growers that are having a hard time getting a disc drill in the ground into hard soils or heavy residue, especially this year, and you ask them how many weights you've got on the back of the drill or the air seeder, and they'll reply by saying, well, I don't have any weights, but the drill's full of seed. And you'll politely say, well, what happens when the drill's almost empty? Well, I don't have much weight on it then. So it's really important that you ballast the drill with adequate weight to keep the rock shafts rotated with adequate down pressure and keep the openers in the ground to target depth to maintain an adequate margin on the gauge wheels to get that consistent seeding depth, even into harder soils or heavy residue or a combination of the above. We strongly encourage guys to have an air seeder with a cart. That's what this is. It's got an air cart up front. So you are separating all of the seed weight, that dynamic changing seed weight from full to empty is separated from the drill entirely in a cart that's up front or behind, that's your choice. So you can ballast the whole frame from front to back, side to side, to do a consistent job cutting residue. And that's why they brought out the air carts 30 or 40 years ago, to separate that dynamic weight change. So we strongly discourage like the CCS drills or the 500T drills. The principle of the seeding frame is fine, but we don't like the dynamic weight change in the middle because you can't ballast the drill consistently to seed into challenging conditions. Obviously, row spacing has an impact. If you're seeding cereals into most geographies around the world, there's a huge amount of research, and we've done some of it, but there's lots of other research out there too that will clearly define the yield advantages to planting cereals into narrow rows. So if you're planting cereals, we strongly encourage the narrower rows. However, with wider rows, you get more down pressure per opener. So if you've got the narrower rows, it takes more weight on the frame to push the openers in the ground. So let's give you some examples here when we're seeding with different seeding equipment, and we're going to show you how we've ballasted these different pieces of seeding equipment to perform at the best standard possible. So here we see a 36-foot John Deere 1850. It's on 7.5 inch spacing, and he's planting parallel to corn residue, as you can see, that was only harvested a few days before planting this winter wheat. So in addition to dry, hard soils, lots of residue that hasn't deteriorated over time. Difficult conditions to plant into. In these conditions, he added 16 weights to the center section at the back, 16 to the front center section, and 12 on each wing positioned towards the back, in addition to markers. Here's a 42.5 foot 1850, as you can see. 30 weights in the center section, in addition to weights in the front and the wings, again towards the back. Here's an 1890 with a lot of weight planted into tough soybean residue. Here's our John Deere 1560 no-tilling a cover crop into heavy corn residue. It's equipped with the precision planting cedar force system that automatically adjusts down pressure on a row by row basis hydraulically to maintain a margin, as you see in the bottom left hand corner of the screen. This is really important because it automatically changes the amount of down pressure in response to changing soil and residue conditions. Here's an example where we're no-tilling soybeans into wheat residue that was planted at a 45-degree angle, and you can see it changing the down pressure on a row-by-row basis as it crosses those passes. So this is a video showing the actual passes sped up a little bit of the 1560 drill that we showed a few moments ago with the precision planting cedar force system with the row by row hydraulic adjustment. So this system actually senses the amount of margin on the gauge wheels and adjusts the down pressure accordingly. And you can see in this example, this is my son planting wheat into corn stalks, and as the day progressed and the dew began to drop on the corn stalks, making them tougher and more difficult to plant through, you can see the amount of down pressure increased automatically on each opener. And then the following morning, when he started again after the residue had began to dry, you can see the down pressure decreasing over time. So this image pretty much shows you some of the benefits of a hydraulic system that automatically adjusts down pressure according to margin on the gauge wheels. It's a good system. This is a 60-foot Case 500 7.5-inch spacing planting into heavy corn residue, as you can see. And you can see the amount of ballast and the location of the ballast to keep these openers in the ground to a consistent basis.